Good evening, this is George Lees talking from Kelso in Scotland to John Patterson in East Sussex. And yesterday, again, 2 days ago, I tried to get the news out. Or was it yesterday, John?
Yes.
Yeah, so yesterday I went to my local police station to try and report the frauds that many of you know all about already. But Law Enforcement UK will do nothing about them. So I went around my hometown with those posters you can see on my web page hanging around my neck, and I asked the genial people of Kelso and visitors from other continents whether or not they were interested in things that are massive frauds against the people, against their salaries, and the pay freeze that is 7 years long in this country. In every sector of life, that's the private sector and the public sector, nobody gets a pay rise except the politicians and the owners of the central banks and the massive merchant banks that are so corrupted it's incredible. And what the police do in Scotland now is they arrest people when they get in arrears, or the private security companies that come into the conversation later on. They are now in the role of the repo man. They're asset stripping jobs, and John Patterson has just listened to the 3 videos I made yesterday, and they can be found now on either Facebook, on my wall, or on Google, on Prof George Lee's Revelations /Complicity and its implications in British law and Nuremberg. Okay, that's my web page, Prof George Lee's Revelations /Complicity and its implications in British law and Nuremberg. And when I was interviewed by the woman yesterday after I returned, they said that I could not get an appointment for 15 minutes. I returned to the office, and then I relayed to the camera that surprisingly they let me keep switched on. John has said that he believes that they are not allowed to tell you to stop recording, or if you want to, what I said to them is that this is really sensitive and they're war crimes, so I'm going to try and record it for my own safety. Is that okay? And they allowed me to do it. And the headlines are: Malcolm Rifkind, G4S, Better Off Together, Arms to Iraq Inquest Chair, Anthony Chilcott, Cairn Energy Scams. The inquest chair is interlocked with Malcolm Rifkind, who was the Foreign Secretary in 2002 when Tony Blair swept into Iraq. And in the last few days, John has been kind enough to tell me that we've had 80 politicians.
85.
85. Yeah.
86 altogether.
And I'm quite stunned that you cannot find details of that on the web. But what I found,
all places.
It's on what?
It's on the BBC website.
Okay, well, I've just looked up the issue on the Times, and it does acknowledge that 80 big-hitting MPs whose impact will be missed is in the headlines. The reason they have resigned is they're complicit in the knowledge that I tried to share with the Scottish Police and Legal Law Enforcement Scotland, again for the 4th time now. Yeah, I've got receipts for all of the accusation, all of the corporate documents on the interlocks between the Foreign Secretary and the inquest chair on the Arms to Iraq scandal. All of that has led to my MP Michael Moore refusing to allow us to contact him or meet him, and that is a constitutional breach that she was unprepared to confront, because what she said is, we can't do anything about crime in Scotland as policemen, you need to report it to your MP. The head of the justice system in Scotland has already given me a receipt for all of the accusations, all of the corporate documents on the Trident nuclear weapon extinction threat. Yeah, run out of London and listen to the videos on that webpage that I've just cited. But all I can find on the resigned politicians, some 80 MPs have resigned their seats and left the precinct, never to return, except of course to the Lords. So that's a declaration that they have been sinful in the Commons, and they're going to continue to sin in the Lords. But William Hague was forced to resign because he's the Foreign Secretary, and as that, he's not allowed to say, like all of the rest of them, that he'll only deal with his constituents' business. And William Hague has been the recipient and acknowledged receipt of all of my emails since 2010, when I became a serious fraud and war crimes investigator. He and his sister are involved with the Prince's Trust, and we've got all the corporate documents on that. And when I told that to the local police, and that the editor of the local newspaper, the Southern Reporter, Miss Susan Windram, who I've made big revelations on, and the crooked town of Selkirk, where the BBC studios are, run by the head of St Andrews University, the golfing hub, and the former head of St Andrews University was Butcher Hague, but that is now written out of British history for reputational reasons. Yeah, and it is massive, and none of them will do anything about it. So visit that webpage, play the videos. John's just watched them, and his reaction is that that woman should be prosecuted for assault. I do not want to take that route. I'm a peaceful protester, and I'm totally honest and objective about everything I report. I try and keep accurate, and I try and take the documentary evidence that this is not a conspiracy theory. And when she referred me to Michael Moore, it's actually on the poster that was round my neck, and there's a red arrow there. You can see it. I'm moving the arrow around it. There is the red arrow that points to Michael Moore and says he and Chris Williamson at Derby North, Gordon Bowden's MPs, and all of my MSPs refused to engage in the confrontation of these massive crimes that has emptied the British Treasury and means that Scotland has to be run as a fraud subsidiary. Yeah, and we've got all the links to the Ponzi shelves at Lothian 50, which are run by the Rothschilds and interlock into the Auckland, New Zealand Rothschild Trust Fund, and all of the links to Dunedin are totally illicit. David Murray's headquarters for his companies that are totally immune from taxation and accountability, as he asset strips the sport and frauds out of Scotland, with the regulators in that case being the Russian Tsar in Lithuania, with Rothschild as a middle name. John and I understand totally the magnitude of those crimes against the people. And the policewoman, when I started to talk about the local paper, she completely gagged, and she tried to turn off my camera physically without my permission, and then she ejected me forcibly from the door. I don't believe it was violent, but she would not have me in the office, because what I was trying to report to her is everything that we've published for years. And when I published the conflicts of interest that are Michael Moore's MPs, the cabinet member, until all of these revelations came out, when he was booted out of the cabinet by the very prudent Prime Minister Cameron. Can you confirm, John, that you received this afternoon my letter to David Cameron and the Whitney Conservatives?
Yes.
Which is what the police asked me to do. My email went to David Cameron and a number of people that are involved in the resignations in Scotland and in England, including William Hague. Yeah, he's no longer the Secretary of State, as is Michael Moore, but Michael Moore is still my constituency MP, and he is totally in breach of the UK Constitution, and the police don't give a monkey about that. Yeah, as long as they get their salary. And I spent the whole of my 20 or 30 minutes in the police station trying to explain the risk to local jobs and how the parking attendants have already lost them. And the parking attendant in Kelso, who I was very fond of, and she used to chat openly, unlike any of the police, with a few recent exceptions, since they began to realise that their pensions are screwed and their salaries are screwed also. And when they get called on to defend our government that is corrupted to the eye teeth, they then have to work 13-hour shifts. All of that is in the interviews and the YouTube videos that I made. All of the corporate documents are available to anybody that's interested in them, and all of the scams of G4S who are doing the asset stripping but running concurrently a massive toxic debt pool. of billions and billions of pounds. So they acquire the solvent properties that the police are in, they asset strip the jobs, they give them to people who can barely speak English, and the people at the top of the chain, which are mentioned in all of the videos, Lord Condon, the Rifkind linkage to G4S, and the linkage to Aberdeen Asset Management that asset stripped Rangers and now run David Murray's trust funds. Yeah, they sponsor all of the sporting events. That's sponsor in inverted commas. They suck the money out of every sport. Every profession is corrupted in the same way, and the massive toxic debt pool that is the Lloyds Banking Group toxic debt pool, the people that I approached to get their signatures in the two big banks, that's it. The RBS was shut because they knew I was coming. Yeah, and the Bank of Scotland next door, and they claimed it was shut because the computer had failed again. That's how the cabal works. Yeah, and right next door to them, the office of Stormouth Darlin has been closed. That's the Stormouth Darlin that John and I talked about in the pounds, shillings and pence religious video that we made. Yeah, and I talked also to the police about Lord Boateng, who's been mentioned many times. He's a criminal, educated in Hemel Hempstead. He became a Treasury officer. He became the representative for the British Cabinet for the Republic of South Africa, and he's on the board of Aegis Defence Systems Limited, and he's a Christian preacher, educated in Hemel Hempstead like all of the criminals and my family members on the Hancock side who have asset strip dentistry and were school chums of Lord Boateng's. Lord Boateng is also registered like these massive frauds that is the Trident 3 and Trident 4 boardrooms run by mercenary army leaders. And when I told that, all of that, to the police, she said, "What do you want us to do about it? We're just the police." Yeah, John has now listened to it. Were you appalled or were you appalled?
Yeah, I'm disgusted by it all, George. I mean, what we're doing, I mean, in some ways, we're fighting for the police to protect their jobs.
Absolutely, that comes over in the first two videos. Yeah, and they pretend that they've lost the case number on the original reporting of this to Michael Matheson, and they try and cover the loss of that document up by telling us that in the tiny little town which is Kelso, with a population of 8,000 people, that they get 420 or so reports every day. My case number was 410. Yeah, and it's just tragic that everybody in the courts, everybody in the judiciary are much worse than the police, and that's all over my website. Look up Speculative Society on my website and you will be stunned. They crashed the banks in 2008 globally. Yet when we declare the culprits like Stormouth Darlin, what happens is that they close the companies down and the innocent workers get sacked. Stormouth Darlin does not work in my town anymore. There are no Stormouth Darlins in that organisation. Peter Stormouth Darlin is in Lothian Road, which is all over this image, and he crashes everybody's pension funds because he's a financial criminal. And Gordon and I, when we were talking about that, agree entirely on it, but Gordon has not yet disclosed the Rothschild involvement that makes it a multinational fraud involving the world's owners. And the linkages to Earl Grey Street, I've written to all of the solicitors and all of the money laundering firms in the Law Society in Scotland. None of them can defend me because there's a huge conflict of interest, which is further down that page. There is the corporate document that is Patricia Tom's declaration that everything on my website are the grounds for my divorce, aka the revelation that prime ministers and presidents are financial profiteers and war criminals. That's why I'm being divorced. Yeah, and when my wife heard in the adjacent room what we were talking about frauds and laundering companies like Brighton Secretaries and Brighton Directors, which are in John Patterson's hometown, and he's going to visit them really soon, so they might have to use the shredder. Yeah, you've seen The Devil's Advocate, John?
Oh, fantastic.
You know when Eddie Barzoon goes for his jog and gets hit by the head by the passers-by that are demonic, yeah? But he's already shredded everything that they're guilty of, and that is a very, very accurate reflection of the role of law enforcement in the frauds that are run by the Law Society in Scotland. I don't know so much about the English end, but the speculative society, the secret societies, the male-only societies. Tell the public what the reaction of my mention, the reaction of the policewoman to my mention of Sheriff Andrew Lothian. She said instantly that she knows about Andrew Lothian, she knows about Lord Condon, and when I said to her, "What do you know about Andrew Lothian?" what was my reply, John?
What was her reply?
No, she said initially, when I said, "Have you heard of Sheriff Andrew Lothian?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "So what has Sheriff Andrew Lothian done as a crime in Scotland that you're aware of?" She said, "Oh, Andrew Lothian. No, I don't know who he is."
Yeah.
He's the gangbang rapist of his own wife and the user of the date rape drug Rohypnol, and his friends in the Speculative Society in Edinburgh and in the Scottish Judiciary were asked to shag his wife after she was incapable of being conscious with Rohypnol. I'm a professor of pharmacology and yeah, I understand totally the use of the Lothian name is a cover-up for all of those crimes in Lothian Road, and the laundering vents for the first 4 companies that Gordon and I looked at for Lothian 50 and the Cairn scams are in Zurich, in brackets the Rothschild Trust, Florida, Mexico and Cavendish Square, London. That's the first 4 we examined, and I've slowly, one by one, dissected the Rothschilds' interlocks, and John knows about the images on the other side of the page. This is the Crown Prosecution Service. That's the Crown that is illegitimate for 160 years. And when the courts at Jedburgh asked me if I accept their jurisdiction, I said immediately no. Everybody has totally ignored that. And when I declared that the monarchy and the Christian oath are both illegitimate because of the revelations of Greg Hallett and my own research, widely published by me and John Patterson with a global audience, yet all of that gets covered up by the appointment of a man called John Halley, and I'm given now a lifelong gagging order on that person. I'm not allowed to open the Freedom of Information request that I sent to the Scottish Government. And if I mention his name, I may get banged up, and you can see in the videos that they are desperately keen to bang me up. Yeah, Arnott Manderson is a joke about the killing of Moira Anderson. It's a series of advocates with devil masters, and if you're a lawyer in that system, you can act as the judge, the prosecuting attorney, or the defence lawyer, and that is a totally illicit for-profit organisation created 1 year before the referendum to keep Scotland in the hands of the illegitimate Crown and England. John's got some Scottish genes. What did you tell me about the police being picked for their low IQ?
I can remember, and I'm going back 3 or 4 years, and this was in the news. I'm going to Google it later. I don't want to switch windows at the moment, George, but it said that they have an IQ test. And if their IQ's over a certain number, they don't get picked. I mean, it's
under a certain number. So IQ's, you're really intelligent if you're up in the 130s or something. But the imbecile king that went to war for the 2nd time in his lifetime and stammered like the people that monitor me under the Ripas scheme, yeah, because their brother's a local councillor, used to be a Conservative, but now, sorry, used to be a Labour man, but he now understands that the only way to get in is to join the Conservative Party. His name is Tom Weatherston. He's becoming a celebrity like the Marquis of Lothian, who's Michael Ancram, the head of the Conservative Party for a few decades, and he runs the Conservative Club in Jedburgh, where the corrupted courts are. They are now totally complicit in these crimes, and awareness of the crime or the gang plot in British law is complicity in the crime. And when I asked the question of the little policewoman in Kelso office yesterday, what was her response to my query of whether she understands that issue?
Well, she said she understood it.
Absolutely, and that's the reason why she would not bring two colleagues in, because I understand that they hedge on that like the bankers do, yeah. And if you've got two witnesses, then you're on the high ground and you've got something that can be enforced. That's why she refused to give me a second witness. And when I mentioned the links to the Royal Prince, with his immunity from any form of reporting of his massive frauds, and the Cornish estates cost £19 million to run, and last year, the same year that he was issued with a gagging order that makes him immune from the release of any news involving him or his dad's involvement in the paedophilia scandals, or the massive work-free pay rises that he got, £700,000 last year for the Cornish estates alone. I don't know how many estates the royals have across the country, but it is a massive scandal that they have massive workforces. And when I wrote to the Queen about these frauds, and I precipitated a unique meeting between the Queen and the Cabinet, it was televised, and you see the Queen discussing jocularly about the gold blocks in the Treasury that Gordon Brown actually sold to the Europeans in the Euro scam to make the Euro solvent again. Gordon Brown sold off all of Britain's gold, and the Queen may not understand that, but Osborne smiled sheepishly and said, yeah, everything's okay in the vaults, Your Highness. Yeah, the whole of the Treasury has been emptied, and when the Queen now has access to all of my website. The index is down the left, on the left hand side here, and the massive frauds against the people and the systematic emptying of the Treasury through the laundering vents in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. In the House of Commons, Michael Moore, who this policewoman referred me to, she said, we're just police, we cannot confront crime in our country. Yeah, isn't it pathetic? Yeah, she's not even prepared to discuss it, but the people on the streets that know that their salaries and their pensions are screwed, and the bankers that refuse to sign or give their initials, that's a corporate command. And you know about the £1 trillion debt pools that those banks run, and everything that is solvent like the Co-op Bank, that was part of the evidence that I had in my posters. Yeah, and I've written to the Parliamentary Banking Standards Committee and exposed the total fraud that was the Lloyds Verdi project, and I've got the receipt for it, but nothing has changed except the chief executive of the Co-op Bank fucked off with £5 million, declared God knows what he's actually got in the havens as a result of the defrauding of that bank. The interest rates and this is why I might be guilty of financial neglect, but they've dropped that because I've got hundreds of thousands, or tens of thousands of pounds at the bank. But the original writs on my divorce case accused me of financial neglect. I cannot qualify for legal aid because they know that I've got the money in my bank accounts that I put there entirely as a six-figure salary earner, and my wife's family live in Chipping Norton, in the Whitney constituency of Prime Minister Cameron, and my brother-in-law's greatest hero, whom my wife worked for when they issued the original writ, but they had to change it because that proves my innocence. Yeah, they live in Chipping Norton, and Gordon has told us, as a professional fraud researcher, how much heritable income she will get. Their house is empty, they're homosexuals, they have no male children, but now they have access to the male children that are mine. I'm not allowed to know where they live. How twisted is that, John?
I'm sickened by it, George.
And Greg Hallett was the victim of the same scandal in New Zealand, and that's the same Greg Hallett that got death threats for exposing the same central banking frauds that we are trying manfully to get out. That project is finished now. They have nothing left to steal. Yeah, and the scandal that is the public service sector, where nobody and everybody that gave their initials understands this entirely, because all the people that work for the local council, the dustbin men, the nurses, everybody in the public sector has had their pay frozen for 7 years back to back. And David Prentice, and they were stunned when I talked about this, and they were delighted to give their initials or their signature and the date. Yeah, he's on the court of the Bank of England. He only issues the money to his elite and fraudulent friends, and they are war criminals, which is why Tony Blair and those 80 people have resigned this week. Because when I send an email like the one I sent to you yesterday, and it goes to the Prime Minister, it goes to Alex Salmond, it goes to Nicola Sturgeon, it goes to my wife's brother, who's an OBE, but has asset stripped everything that the country could have for nothing, like my wife's divorce solicitor, yeah, Miss Patricia Thom. They're all on the take. She used to be the lawyer for the local council, and within weeks of me coming back to Scotland, she switched into the marital sector as if they knew what was going to happen. And when I became a fraud researcher and I started talking to Gordon Bowden in the back room about explicit crimes and the laundering companies that they all use, and the government use, and the Rothschilds use, she came into the room and told Gordon to fuck off. And Gordon was quite shocked by that. And all that we are talking about is the stealing from our own children. And my wife is so determined to be a capitalist icon. I told you about the Rule Britannia song this morning. Yeah, that's a monument to Thompson that wrote Rule Britannia. My wife and the local council here and the Scottish Government and the law firms that they appointed, like Arnott Manderson, in the year of the referendum to suppress the horrible frauds and the release of that information by you and me and Gordon. You know about how they've covered up the sheriffs by changing their identity. So Sheriff Halley was appointed. He's the man that I'm not allowed to talk to in the whole of my life. Yeah, he's the man that I requested to...
George, you can't talk to this guy ever again in your lifetime.
Yeah, I've made a little video about my query about how long does the gagging order imposed by Sheriff Drummond, who refused to let me plead not guilty on the assault case, which means that I can never be a politician in the UK. Isn't that clever? They're trying to silence me, and each time they try, they get more complicit in the massive crimes against the people. And my wife's solicitor, you know, who's a Canadian, like the head of the central bank in London, she says to me, George, I really admire your work on energy, and I've not really looked at the document that is cited above. Yeah, what was the number for that document? Let me read it out on here. Patricia Thom, PT/EL, Lees, V01-01. She lodged it with the Jedburgh Sheriff Court. She sent the letter to me, and then I immediately forwarded it to Michael Moore, because every one of the communications on Michael Moore's linkages to JP Morgan, George Soros and the Westminster Foundation for Democracy are included in the letter. Yeah, so what she's done is, this is my wife's solicitor. Oh, we've got some little trivial diversion coming in. Sassy Cupcake. We might get to talk about orgasms, John. Are you up for that? Are you more interested in the actual crimes against the people? Yeah, because on the other image on that page, we've got a picture of the Halley that I'm not allowed to talk about, that I've been denied a Freedom of Information request on, a picture of the Arnott Manderson label. That's Moira Anderson, the child that was murdered when Stephen House got his pay rise. And when I talked to the attendant at the cop shop yesterday, she said, you need to turn that off now and leave the room. Yeah, Stephen House got his salary raised from 100,000 to 250,000 on the same week that he got his knighthood from HRH. And they revived the Moira Anderson killing as the sideshow, like the Lothian sideshow that is the gangbang rapist. Let me see if I can find that image.
I see they've resurrected Jill Dando again.
Who was she again? It was another affair to cut.
She was murdered because she was on the track of the paedophile rings.
Yeah.
And in the headlines today, it's like, who really murdered Jill Dando? And I thought to myself, well, it's all diversionary stuff, George, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the whole, and you know, even people in the Church of Scotland now, the vicars that are deep thinkers, I think I told you this in the video earlier in the week, but what they know now, because of the things that have happened to the people that stand in our way, yeah, and Lord Patton has never been heard of since May the 17th, 2014. That's nearly a year now. We're not allowed to know whether he's alive or dead or still in the ITU, and all of the things that we discover about his partner in life, Louise, being on the board at Marks and Spencer's, and all of those interlocks with the world's elites. It is absolutely illicit, and the coppers do not have the courage to even talk about it. As soon as I mentioned the Prince's Trust and the local paper, she gagged me. She tried to turn the camera off, and you say that what she did in eject. Shall I show the readers what she did?
Sure.
Yeah, let me just play the little video. So there's the bit, let's get physical in Complicity with Michael Moore. So what she wanted me to do was to shut the fuck up, to leave their premises, and to let her go back and do the crossword upstairs, where they claim in a tiny little town where they get 500 or so accusations every day of the week, which is why their logbook is difficult to thumb through. Everybody else in the world has to computerize their database and make it searchable, yeah, but the police are able to cover it up by buffoonery, which is maybe why you're correct about that IQ issue. And what you've got there is an image of all the interlocking directors. So this is the video. I don't know if I can make it full screen. Can you do that?
Well,
it's an erosion of democracy and the British Constitution. Michael Moore is a criminal at the Westminster Foundation for Democracy Limited. It's already on my website. You're refusing to take my information. Yeah, you are refusing. Can you justify refusal?
Can you justify what you're saying? No, you
yes,
can't.
it's on my website. I want to register it as a crime in the local police station.
So this is when she gets physical, and notice that I've got both hands on my camera.
My emails go to the Lothian and Borders Police every day of the week. None of them get a receipt, but I've got a receipt here from the Scottish Justice Ministry for the Trident scandal that could have freed Scotland and saved all of your jobs. Can I ask for your name? Thank you for the non-violent rejection.
So, yeah, and so today I sent to John Patterson and the Lothian and Borders Police the whole of this website. The citation for Michael Moore's crimes are there. He's linked into George Soros, JP Morgan, and that's published openly, and the website is here. I'll click on it now and I'll show you just exactly what the cabal is. Okay, so you've heard of George Soros before, John?
Oh, sure.
And you've heard of the banking crash in 2008? And the mysterious circumstances around that. There's Michael Moore MP lounging on his office door that when I go there is always locked. There's GRG Financial Consultancy Limited, and the links to the conflicts of interest in the local lawyers are massive. There's the interlock between JRG and the People's IFA company. There is the involvement of one of the peers of our realm, Archibald Gavin, Archie Hamilton. You remember the Hamiltons that were guilty with the Hess family involvement, and they were involved in the body double for Hess being incarcerated once the member of the Hamilton family visited Winnie Churchill and asked for his instructions. Yeah, the 15-minute delay is an imperative, and I think I told you about the last divorce hearing, where when I wrote to them 1 hour before the hearing was held, they had to delay the hearing by 1.5 hours so that they could get their team plan revised. Yeah, and my wife was in their company when all of the law team entered the court. It is massive, and because my wife and her brother are in the Rothschilds' thrall, they will do everything they can to suppress me, and they may even have me executed. That's the marital oath. Yeah, Lord Boating is educated at the same school as them. He's a killer in a Christian preacher's uniform. Yeah, that's Aegis Defence Systems, also registered in Eccleston Square in London. And you know the magnitude of the geopolitical and media cover-ups of that place. Yeah, Kate Adie is also registered there. You know Kate Adie, that talks up the villainy of the Chinese at Tiananmen Square, and talks up the brutalisation of the whole of the Middle East for all of that time. And they're directly linked through Kev Drummond and the Flemings to the Future of Syria funding and the Rothschilds' 5 Arrows projects, and for them it is a massive laugh at the people's expense. So this man's an expert in the Coldstream Guards. Yeah, that's the dead man's boots. There's a second-hand shop in Coldstream that sells dead man's boots even today.
Oh, right.
That's John Lamont, MSP, advisor to the Scottish Law Society, former members of Brodie's, former employee of Brookhouse, Freshfields and Derringer, one of the top 5 law firms, the Magic Circle. Yeah, with all the links to Otago University in New Zealand, and the links that have now been declared by his family to Norman in Orkney, which will be a tax haven really soon, and there's nothing that police in Scotland are prepared to do about that, because their bosses are trained in London, and Fettes, where Tony Blair, who resigned yesterday, was trained to kill people in other people's countries, but yesterday he was forced, because of you and me and Gordon and the other spirited people that have the courage to confront these bastards in every sector of corruption. That includes the religion. We're unique in that respect, John. No one else will take it on.
No, that's huge, George. I mean, that is quite incredible. It's mind-blowing. I think you should direct people, George, to that page on your website.
Well, you see,
Rifkind.
So that's Faking the New Testament is on the index on my webpage, and we've got 8 to 10 now issues exposed in different pages there, and we've made dozens of videos on the frauds, on the Pisos, on the Roman court, on the involvement of the missions in South Pacific, the genocides that occur in Africa, the genocides that occur in North America, and the vicious jokes about the people in British history being involved in the culling of the American Indians. That's the Butcher Jones and Dad's Army joke. It is really, really sick. And there's the when I was looking for a divorce solicitor everywhere between Perth, where Scottish citizens have lost the right to roam, and Newcastle, where Lord Patton and Tiny Rowlands totally asset stripped the whole town and drove it into capitalism. Everything that was in the public sector was privatised by Tiny Rowlands in Newcastle, and Lord Patton, when he moved there, insisted on living in a massive multi-million-pound mansion, and all of the students now get stolen from, to the extent of £50,000 for the honours degree that he got for nothing, and he also got his heart attack for. This is a little video that I've made on the Westminster Foundation for Democracy Limited, links to JP Morgan and George Soros. And the name there that I've highlighted on the posters that were round my neck yesterday is the name of the boss at a local solicitor's firm called Melrose and Porteous. They took me on and they had a laugh at my expense by telling me after an hour and a half that it sounded as if my wife had the right to take everything from me. Yeah, that they believed that everything that I had in the document that they had not read was my evil behaviours. They're the exposures of war crimes and massive crimes against the pensions and the salaries and the public sector and the private sector workers. They know that now, which is why they've totally changed the terms for the divorce, and they falsifies the desertion dates, and everything that they do is a lie. Yeah, and the man's name is Alexander James McCall, and when I discovered the links to Michael Moore JRG and the rest of the links to Michael Moore's empire, yeah, and the Westminster Foundation for Democracy with its 3,000 Ponzi shells, that's Westminster, our government. That's another scam in the House of Commons, and you know about the magnitude of Moser scams in the House of Lords, and about who's the one that's named Adonis's scams. Yeah, every time we talk about religion, it interlocks with the massive geopolitical frauds and land grabs.
Well, what about the other guy, Zahawi?
Yeah, they're all tied in, but that's not part of this story. Yeah, it's much more localised. So there's JRG Financial Consultancy Limited. Let me just run up through the names. Mr. Andrew Stephen Fay, Mr. Ian Robert Henson, Mr. Ian Robert Henson, Thin Blue Line issue, Mr. Alan John Reid, Mr. Alexander James McCall, the head of Melrose and Porteous. Have you heard this name before? Mr. Andrew Douglas Home.
Yes.
In what context have you heard the name before?
He was a Prime Minister once.
Absolutely. He carpet bombed the Garden of Eden for the BP plant. Have you heard the name Rayner?
Oh, Princess Rayner.
No, Rainier. That's Rainier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mr. Andrew Keith Rayner. The Rayners are the Markhams, Lord Markhams of Ukraine, and Crown Oil in Rochdale. And I've had great fun with them, because what I've done is I've rung into their call centre and pretended that I'm an investor, and when I asked them, where does your oil come from, they said, oh, we've never been asked a question like that. What we do is we sell bonds and shares in our companies, and that's why Ukraine is in the news all the time. And when you and I talk to Jom Fetzers, we're allowed to mention Lord Markham of Ukraine, but that little shill Cahill accuses us of being inaccurate in our research and having no documentary evidence for it. Yeah, and when I tell them about Mr. Bean and the London Olympics joke, Jom Fetzers shits himself, and he has to take himself to hospital to cover up his reluctance to talk about the war crimes and the ensuing jokes. So Rayner is Lord Markham of Ukraine. This is on the same board as the boss at Melrose and Porteous in the tiny little town of Duns, in John Lamont's constituency, near where they sell the dead man's boots. And then you keep going, and I don't know if there are any big. Mr. John Young Rutherford, another owner of the River Tweed, the Right Honourable Sir Archibald Gavin Hamilton, Mr. Gordon John Sutherland. Do you know who the Sutherlands are, John?
Refresh my memory, George.
They're the Dukes and Duchess of Sutherland.
Yeah.
Who sent the colonies to the colonists to the colonies.
Yes.
And are directly related to Lord Leveson of Liverpool and the remuneration of all of these elites because of Andy Coulson and Rebecca Brooks's scams in the media and the crimes of Lord Stevenson, the former head of the Metropolitan Police, who's on the board of the investigative journal that I looked into the other week when I was given the referral by freedom fighters in Scotland who are reluctant to talk about anything now, since they realise that I realise that those interlocks take them into the Duke of Roxburgh. Can you hear the hum? Can you hear the hum?
I can't, George.
Yeah.
Not sense.
Yeah, they are really ever so bastardly, because what they do is they steal from the people, they bang up the poor tenants in the care homes, and then as the runners of the £1 trillion debt pools, they have a good time in the havens with Richard Branson, who every time I want to listen to a video on YouTube now is talking up the prize winning events to be entrepreneurs at our country's expense. He gets all the contracts, he pays no taxes, and everything that he has is the involvement with the Flemings in the leading of the transformation of peaceful countries in the Middle East into brutalised countries in the Middle East. They never get a life. That's the Future of Syria Fund with the involvement of the Fleming family, and you know how big that crime is. That's World War II and all of the jokes that they make in the Bond films, and the revelation that James Bond, the actor, has also had a heart attack, and the way that he's treating that is to drink David Murray's wine in the elite estates that David Murray has, vast tracts of land in France. Yeah.
We speak about Sean Connery.
Yeah, Sean Connery had a heart attack, and David Murray's his advice is take my red wine. And as a scientist and a pharmacologist, that myth that red wine prevents heart attacks has been perpetrated for a couple of decades already. Yeah. So Alexander James McCall, 1 to 3 Cambridge Street, Edinburgh, EH1 2DH, interlocked to the Douglas homes and the reigners of the fraudulent Crown Oil and the Lord Markham of Ukraine jokes, Mr. David Gold, Mr. David Robert Leask, and the Sutherland, I don't know whether that is, but the Rutherford man is a Tweed commissioner like Lord Sanderson of Bowden that we talked about the other day. He's the one that scams everybody into the Freemasonic job loss, yeah, and he's the negotiator of the EU fish quotas for 30 years under Mrs. Thatcher, and he's the one who asked me to kill fish during the embargo for preservation reasons of killing fish in the early part of the summer. Yeah, that is massive, and he is unable to account for himself, and he's linked into all those people that link into the Butlins owners and all of the dukes and duchesses. The only Jewish family I know in the region are on the Tweed Commission, and when we report their crimes, what you find is that they transform their articulate director holdings and all of the things that they do to own the whole of Scotland. They cover it up, and they cover it up with a joke that I explained to you this morning. Who becomes their CEO when they cover it up?
Smith.
John Smith. Let me show you images of that. That's in an email that I sent earlier today to the police in Scotland, as I was requested to do by the policewoman yesterday. You heard her say, send us an email.
Yes.
Look, all of my emails for 5 years have gone to the Lothian and Borders Police. It's called Inquiries Lothian and Borders Police. Nobody can tell me who opens and reads those emails. It's just a diversionary shunt. Yeah?
Cool.
Yeah, and what I've done is sent it to them. I've sent it to the Prime Minister, and I've sent it to all of the resigned politicians. Yeah, and it went to you. It went to 300 people globally. One of them is you. Okay, you're in the CC field. Did you get it? Did you get it, or is it being blocked by the...
No, I've got it. I'll tell you what, I've got 5,500 emails.
Yeah.
Do you know, what's happened with me, George? I've joined so many different sites now and downloaded all our videos that I'm getting too many. You see, I used to like to reply. We get so many good comments.
Well, that's right. I don't have the time to do that, and I don't make comments available on my website for time consumption.
To to people that I don't get back to.
Can I just relay the magnitude of the interlocks on my case before my batteries run out?
Oh yeah, go on.
Because that letter, I've responded constructively to that little blonde bitch's request to email, you know, and waste more of my time on sending emails. So I sent it to the Prime Minister, yeah, and to John Lamont MSP, and to Alex Salmond, and to Nicola Sturgeon, and to the Cabinet Secretary, that is Michael Matheson. That's the head of the justice system in Scotland. To Hague, to Pia Aaron Kilde. Do you know who that is?
Kilde?
Yeah, in Belgium. She is the woman that is the secretary and news magnate for Barroso, and it was me that sparked the her name is Pia Aaron Kild Hansen with a hyphen in the middle. She's Pia Aaron Kild Hansen at ec.europa.eu. She's Barroso's media magnate. She gets all of my emails for all of that time. Rory Stewart was the envoy to the Middle East, yeah, the ambassador for the Middle East, right in the middle of the brutalisation of that, and that launches the career of a Rory Stewart, who's an electrical engineer in Jedburgh. That's the corrupted Jedburgh, and he's the man that refused to let me ask more than one question at the referendum debate when John Lamont and Paul Wheelhouse, the Deputy Justice Speaker, the Deputy Justice Minister in Scotland, were the speakers on the podium. And all of the things that I've hung round my neck at that meeting are intensely interesting to all of the local SNP activists, because they know that that could have freed Scotland. And that's Paul Wheelhouse's role in life as the Deputy Justice Minister, and a socialist like Tony Blair, the murderer. Yeah, it's pathetic. But let me get the news out. So it went to inquiries at Lothian Borders Police first, as requested by the polite but a little bit ballistic policewoman that you think is guilty of assault. I do not want to charge people that. She's stressed because I know that they all know that you and me are right at the heart of their illicit and greedy operation. And when it's murderous and genocidal, they get really sensitive about the use of the Nuremberg word, which is why I used it. Okay? John Lamont, Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, Cabinet Secretary for Justice, that's Matheson. George Lees, so I know that it's been delivered. Office at Whitney Conservatives, that's the Prime Minister. Hague William Parliament.uk, it's no longer an address as the Secretary of State, so I will no longer get confirmation of receipts, which is why he resigned. He's got a heavy stress load. Rory Stewart brutalised Iraq with Tony Blair's armies. He's in a pinstripe suit, and the Rory Stewart from Jedburgh is a local councillor, and I have a gagging order from them for talking about their financial scams and their toxic debt pool, and the way they have asset stripped every public sector initiative, and the care homes and the disabled homes and the mentally retarded or educationally subnormal homes are a real issue of conscience for Miss Patricia Thom, the Canadian. On that board, she's Miss Patricia Louise Thom. Yeah, and everything is vicious. She's the lawyer for the Scottish Borders Council when Alisdair Hutton, the military tattoo man in Las Vegas and the boss at the British Legion, where the Duke of Westminster has that massive 700 million litigation fund and is born the richest man in Britain. He now runs the British Legion as its director. Hutton, the husband of Deirdre, the Queen of the Quangos, now divorced, yeah, runs everything else in our region, and he's the boss for Miss Thom before she comes into my case. And the new boss at the Scottish Borders Council doubled her salary when she got the job. Every one of her employees has had their pay frozen for 7 years, and Dave Prentice is particularly guilty on that front. Yeah, so it went to Barroso's PA. Barroso's resigned, and all of the letter, you know, all of the people that have resigned, it went to all of our media quislings, including, you're right next to John Humphreys, the Baron, yeah, the man who's on Mastermind. Evan Davis, James Naughty the Scottish traitor, James Reynolds, Mike Wooldridge, Sarah Montague. That's the Montagues that are the Duke of Westminster frauds. Yeah. Yeah, massive. It went to the Five in America, and it went to one of Britain's leading moralists, who I've been contacting for 5 years, but I never get a response. She's Miss Joan Bakewell. I used to fancy her when she was young, but now she's a criminal like the rest of them. And it went to all of Field's friends all across the world. Joy Steele, the woman that went ballistic when I mentioned Christianity. Yeah, because all of them sadly are lacking in the intellectual capacity to tie together all of these massive frauds. And it went to dozens and dozens of people in the UK Air Force and in their military schools, which are very near to me, because I'm trying to spark a revolution. And if we get the RAF on our side, because their pay is frozen, yeah, and all of the things that they do to brutalise other countries, which is why I compliment David Cameron all the time. They wanted to create a no-fly zone over Syria when the weapons inspectorate came to call, and that was run by Angela Kane, the head of the World Bank. Yeah, it's absolutely ruthless.
That wasn't David Cameron, that was public pressure.
Well, that's right, but Tony Blair is so evil that he ignored the pressure. He killed his foreign secretary in the Cairngorms, and he killed David Kelly. Yeah, if those are not false news items. Yeah, nobody's allowed to know, but the killing of people is a nice little diversion from the massive $1 trillion debt pools and the abuse of the ordinary people that run their own home as a civilized place. But when you become a fraud researcher and you expose the Rothschilds, there's a tendency for them to get aggressive with you. I'm thoroughly enjoying the conflict, and I want the RAF and the army to know what they're fighting for. Yeah, it's very.
I'd like to shove £1 million down Tony Blair's throat. They love money so much. I mean, they could never spend this money.
Well, that's Richard Branson's prize. If you come up with an entrepreneurial initiative to steal from the people like he does, you can win £1 million for suggesting it, and then it will have hundreds of subsidiaries all over the brutalised world, and nobody's prepared to regulate it, which is why the policeman today reacted like a typical policeman.
George, I'll tell you a weird coincidence. At the same time you were in your...
Let me just reveal the John Smith joke, and the people that... I've just told you about Patricia Tom, the Canadian, that is running my wife's divorce case, worked for the council as a slave, and then got onto my case because I'm the most informed person in the world, and that's why I was kicked out of the university in New Zealand. That's the Agent Orange cover-up, and what happened to my Vietnamese student, also kicked out. It's absolutely brutal. Yeah, because they know I'm accurate, they know I will expose everything, including Lord Sainsbury being the science minister, and sparked the fucking obesity epidemic. I'm allowed to talk like that in my own home, but when I talk to that in the pub to ambulance drivers' girlfriends, yeah, then it's very easy to put a sticking plaster on their shoulder and declare that she was seriously injured. But none of them want to talk about the ambulance driver executive who resigned from his job, and on the Monday morning after he's taken his 6-figure pension came back to work and takes his 6-figure salary again. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about in the pub. It's not war crimes, yeah, but that's why they bang me up. They want me in prison, which is why I keep my hands by my side when I'm being assaulted by the police, who can do nothing about crime in Scotland. So John Smith is the senior executive for everything I investigate, including the intel hub in Woolwich, including all of the scams of Baroness Blackstone and all of the figures that we talk about. When I reveal it, all of a sudden the CEO becomes John Smith, and that is an ancient joke. It takes you back to the Bing Crosby war bonds joke. And can I tell you that Lothian and Borders Police have a chief executive? Yeah, can you guess what his name is?
Bing Crosby.
No, John Smith.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So Patricia Thom, the aggressive lawyer that referred me to domestic violence, homeless sector, as a director on the Citizens Advice Bureau. Yeah? Do you know how the Citizens Advice Bureau works?
I've never been involved with
It's a voluntary organisation. If you're a decent person with a lot between your ears, you can volunteer to counsel people. They get no pay, but Patricia Thom, the asset stripper, is on the board of and they referred me to domestic violence, homelessness, run by the housing associations that are in a massive £1 million debt pool, and when this shelter appear in the courts and they chat genially to me, because they look just like the woman that I met when I penetrated the barrier and the frisking at Arnott Manderson Advocates. She was the only employee in the building that I met that day. She was in the courts defending tenants of the corrupted and totally busted for cash debt pool that is the 4 or 5 Borders housing associations. They're run by the social landlords who nobody's allowed to know their identity. They're run because what was public and what were the council houses and what were the council care homes are now private assets of the regime that asset stripped them. Can you guess who they are likely to be? The Dukes and Duchesses. And Deirdre Hutton was clever enough when she ran the health board to get all of the land back, even although the original owners that they leased it from were elites and dukes and duchesses. And I work as a fishing guide in that place, and I earn a paltry income. But I'm ever so proud of what I'm doing, and I'm ever so delighted that a genial and informed person like you is prepared to back me up, because they're quaking in their boots now.
Yeah.
And so that scam, can you guess in World War II what the Hogan's Heroes scam is? When you reveal that everybody is a for-profit member of the Fleming family intel team and the treasonous team for profit, and you've heard Greg Hallett talking about that before the original Greg Hallett was disappeared. Yeah, what they've got is the capacity to call the person who's the CEO on the scam. What do they call them in Germany, do you think? John Schmidt.
Oh yeah, same thing.
And the same characters are in the jokes about, it's right into the current day. The characters in Hogan's Heroes are now the characters in the Big Bang Theory. They think it's really funny to keep replaying the Egyptian myths in the Christianity story. Yeah? Everything that happens with Joseph at the head of the new family, it's the same. That's the Joseph of many colours. He proved himself to be an effective capitalist, like my wife is trying to do. And suddenly he's the head of the new religion when they go to Bethlehem. And they have the joke about no room at the Innsbruck.
Yes.
Hitler's birthplace. It's really, really funny, and it is really, really vicious when you're forced into poverty and joblessness by the people that run the world this way, and they're the preachers at the Church of Scotland. But there is a decent one now, and I'm going to protect her with my every breath. Yet she realises that it is really important morally that when you're in the Christianity sector or you're in the religious sector, that the God in the skies is the person that's going to see you at the pearly gate, or his team. No human can know how many gods there are, what their gender are, or what they are thinking. But I take my cues from the skies and the animism thing that we talked about earlier when we were off air. But can you see the magnitude of what's happening? That's why I've used the Nuremberg word in the title for that.
It's so big, George. Fortunately we've got people now, we've got so many followers, people are beginning to understand it. But to a layman, this is just way over their heads.
Well, but if you watch the 3 videos and you look at what's on the posters, war crimes, interlocking directors, massive profiteering, the involvement of the Rothschilds, the world owners, and you know how powerful their assassination bureaus are. Where is the most famous assassination bureau in the world now, and who runs it?
Are we talking about MI6 or Mossad?
No, I'm talking about the European Union and its headquarters. Where is that?
Oh, in Brussels.
Yeah. Who runs it?
Who runs it?
Yeah. Which politician's wife runs it?
Oh,
Nick Clegg's wife.
yes.
Portuguese wife. Like Manuel, so Nick Clegg can slap her on the head and pretend that the Basel faulty joke is nothing to do with the central bank in Switzerland and all of the asset stripping by the G8 countries, where the Canadians are doing okay. You remember the song? I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay.
Yep.
Miss Thom's relatives are Governor Generals on one of the massive estates there, but not in the current regime, for reputational reasons. It is vicious, yeah, absolutely vicious, and they have no conscience. And when they get the cancers and the fatal accidents in their community, they have to keep it strictly quiet in case it engenders panic.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So what else did we talk about this morning that you were sensationalised by? So that's the website that I've sent to the Lothian and Borders Police, as impolitely requested by that ballistic little woman. Yeah, she's unprepared to confront any crime in Scotland unless her bosses tell her to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the reason that I met the superintendent. Did I tell you the story about them trying to marry me off to the superintendent's daughter?
Yes, vaguely.
Yeah, he was at the rugby match this afternoon. Everybody monitors my every word, and the man Henderson was at the rugby match this afternoon, and when the Kelso supporters pointed that out, because they understand my every word for the whole of the week, I went and sat next to Mr. Henderson, and he's really friendly, and his daughter's now in Australia, a school teacher. Yeah, and it's just amazing. You know, you're allowed to monitor people in their own home as part of the social network in our town. Nobody will come forward and talk about why they do that and why they're allowed to do it in people's bedrooms. And the monitor for me under the RIPAS scheme is the brother of our local councillor, who's turned tail on being a socialist and has become a conservative because he can get elected that way. Yeah. It's just vicious.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm delighted that the people in the south are now beginning to cite who their police commissioner is in the region. And I prompted that last night when one of your friends called me, and we got talking about the real estate frauds that mean that people that are lucrative, they get involved with UK Column, and the people borrow money from them. Yeah, that's your friends at UK Column. They lend money.
They're not friends, George.
Well, yeah, I only learned this last night, but I'm delighted that those people that are the victims of these huge frauds against the common people that cannot pay their rent because all of their jobs are taken away in a premeditated gesture by the totally corrupted cross-party government that we have, and suddenly everybody that used to be able to take holidays abroad are deprived of their own home. Yeah, it's just amazing. The energy, what you said about refusing to pay your bills is all that needs to happen.
Oh, I'm 100%. I don't give a shit, George. I've told them point blank.
Yeah,
in fact, I even forwarded the email to the Sussex Police. I said, you can do what you want, I'm not paying.
Well, the energy bills are particularly vicious.
Yep.
But when you think about it, you know, charging for water.
It's disgusting.
But everything that God gives us for free, they're now charging for, and that includes breathing. That's the green issues and the carbon tax.
Oh my God! I think we spoke a couple of months ago, and I said, if my parents were to come back now, and I said, look, Mum and Dad, you're not going to believe this. Every time I flush the toilet, I have a drink. It's metered. It's like beer. You've got to pay for it.
Yeah.
You couldn't make it up. But people accept it, George. I'm not accepting it. I'm not paying it.
Well, it's the energy bills that are the straw that has broken the camel's back.
Yes,
and even Miss Thom agrees with me. She admires me for my work in energy bills because she's a victim of that.
Of course.
Yeah, even as a profiteer in every asset stripping activity that they engage in, they think that the things that impact on them are really important. And that's why the law courts are closing, because they're so fucking greedy that they have no money left in their own funding stream, unless it's for a trivial cover-up like the launch of the rapist Sheriff Lothian.
Yeah.
And that's published on the front page of the Scottish Law Reporter with the closure of this for the second time, because what they've got at Stormouth Darling is a reputational problem because of all of their capacity to crash. When the Stormouth Darlings were actually working there, you know, it's very unreliable. Then he moves on to Lothian Road and all the pension funds that we talk about, and he's busting them, and everything gets tucked away in the Havens or the Rothschilds Trust in Auckland, and all of a sudden they have to find a cover for it. So they sack the innocents in Kelso Square that work for the company. And you know, the company that has taken over from them has got people on the board of Ernst & Young, along with the boss at Otago Polytechnic. Can you hear the intel? Yeah? My wife used to work for Otago Polytechnic.
It's crystal clear.
Yeah, but what I'm telling you is shameful. Yeah? But they have no shame. And the little copper, what did you tell me what was the threshold for IQ to become a policeman? I knew that they had a height limit and you had to be big and tall like John Cleese the thief.
That's been reduced now. You don't have to be tall anymore. You don't have to be tall, but you must have a low IQ to become a police officer. And I read that a few years ago, and it stuck in my mind, and I thought, well, you know, I mean, you can understand it with some of them.
Yeah.
That woman that you were speaking to, she probably had an IQ of 60.
So I'm quite stunned what I've learned. Let me get the pictures of the Speculative Society up again, because I'm not sure if we've talked about that together, have we?
Yes, we've done separate videos on all of this stuff, George.
Okay, so are you aware of the magnitude of what the Speculative Society in Edinburgh do?
Oh!
Globally?
Yes.
So I'm just wondering how many, because nobody's allowed to know. The last publication that I'm working from was in 2002. It's an official secret that no one's allowed to know who the members are for all that period of time. How long is it since 2002? We're 13 years ahead of that. And everything that happens in the globalised crash comes out of the underworld at Edinburgh University, strictly secret. And now that they're pretending that they have a rapist in their community, they're allowing women in to be politically correct. Isn't that astute of them? They're buffoons, but they own the whole world by stealing and killing. Let me just, what was I going to show you? The website for that. It's a massive set of crimes. So are you aware, as a deep researcher on the New World Order, of any equivalent secret societies across the English border?
Not off the top of my head, George. There's so many.
Because we've mentioned, you see, you've got the universities, and when I learned about the apostles at Cambridge being the intel, you know, that launched those people into Russia. What was the name of the 3 spies that were Cambridge? Can you remember that? The whole of Christ's College, Cambridge, launches.
One of them was Blunt, wasn't it?
That's it, yeah, and I forget the name of them. And they're all alleged to be homosexuals, but
every single one.
All of it is false news, like Christine Keeler.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the forecourt issues and the cover-up of the free oil scam. Yeah, and the Russians are the researchers that discovered that. And my mate Jeff Rents, that launched the new Prime Minister in Italy, is the person that was brave enough to release it. And when he did that, the investigative journalists like Fetzer, and who's the man, Gordon Duff, and all of their interlocks, they began to attack Renzi for his profiteering as a reporter, because he's got a motorbike like Billy Connolly, and they think it's a fat cat. But what he's done is to reveal the truth that made Renzi the new Prime Minister in Italy without even an election. You remember that? Jeff Renz, when I got in touch with Jeff Renz and Google monitor all of my mails to the whole world, which is why it's owned in Woolwich, yeah, like McAfee, yeah, and when I started to communicate with Jeff Renz, and the man that runs, I forget what his name is, Dean Henderson, is the man that is involved in the river runs through it, and the private airbase up there that was used to bomb Russia and Germany in World War II. Strictly secret, nobody knows about it but you and me and the listeners to my videos. Yeah, that is why the man Renzi was appointed as the Italian Prime Minister. They did not bother with an election. As soon as we released the news that there are innocents prepared to talk about the forecourt scandal that was the Cold War for 40 or 50 years, then they cover it up with a little plant, and they attack the innocent members that declare the truth amongst their numbers. It's just amazing what they will do for the cash bun, to dismember our world. And that's why I believe David Cameron is the man for the job. Tony Blair is a little shit, and he's a murderous, genocidal world leader, which is why he's resigned in the face of the winds of change that we are blowing at them. Yeah, but David Cameron is a decent, meek man. Yeah, he's been a victim of the acts of God. I don't know whether Tony Blair has any children, or whether any of them died or were disabled when they were born, but it is really important. David Cameron will now realise why his son was disabled, and Gordon Brown does too, but I have much more faith in David Cameron as a humanist because of what happened or did not happen with the brutalisation of Syria, entirely for profit and for cover-up. He was reluctant to allow democracy to enter into the bombing.
I don't know, George, because Cameron's only a puppet. He can't decide things. He can't, George.
No, he can't, but because they're under pressure, and because we're using the Nuremberg word, if he does what Tony Blair does, where do you think he ends up when the citizens become aware of why they've had the 7-year pay freeze? Yeah, he's not guilty of any war crimes because he did what he did under pressure from you, me, Gordon, and the others. Yeah, and some of the pressure is quite tokenistic, but I lost my job on the river because of what happened that Sunday, and Gordon's mate M was part of the art. Yeah, and I've explained to you how Gordon's mate M makes the carriages and has the patents on the nuclear weapons transport, and how he drinks with the Breeden camps, and he pretends that he's intimidated by that. I now totally understand everything that happens in our world, and that's why I'm approaching you, because I get the vibes about you through the seagull community. Yeah, don't ever mention that to any psychiatric doctor that you talk about. It might be really dangerous for me to reveal that I believe in the gods under power. I don't know whether or not I believe in reincarnation, and I don't know how animism works, but
I'll tell you now, George, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, karma, there's various words, but there's something going on. I've felt it for a long time. Oh yeah,
and you know, I've told you, and I've told Fetzer about the witchcraft theory. I believe that you're a moralist and you're upstanding, then you can become a wizard. Yeah, and I believe that I've got that status now, which is why people fear me. Yeah, and they do not fear me because I'm violent or evil. They fear me because I'm good, and the world around me is totally corrupted, and the people around me, apart from my male children, are totally corrupted. My male children have almost all of the traits that I have, but I'm not allowed to see them anymore.
Oh my God. You're not allowed to see your own children.
Well, I'm not allowed to know where my youngest son lives. The other two are adults already. Yeah? But I'm not allowed...
Can you just explain why you're not allowed to see your own children?
Because of Miss Thom's referral of my case to domestic violence. I have never even smacked my children. My wife does all of that. And I've told you the story about the knife throwing incident and the breaching and the leaking of the metal sink.
Yes.
My wife